Glad you're here. Hopefully you brought some questions. Some of them will be answered in the presentation, I hope. And for the others, please don't hesitate to drop a question in the comments or send me an email or a WhatsApp. You'll have contact details right at the end of the presentation. Now then, how did this presentation come about? A few days ago, I was attending an event, the first ever Taucherlebnistage in Germany, organized by friends. And I got to present on two of my favorite topics. How do you start rebreather diving? There's a different presentation for that. And how do you move from recreational to technical diving? We taped the presentations, but the audio was reasonably bad. So I thought, okay, I'll just redo them to camera in the comfort of my own home. So here we are. What you're going to get from this presentation is hopefully some answers to the questions of how do you switch, when might be the best time in your diving career to switch, and what to consider before you're taking that step into technical diving. Assuming the technology is not letting me down, fingers crossed, there will be German language subtitles here whilst you're listening to me in English. You'll also see that all the slides are in both languages, so hopefully that helps both audiences a little bit. Now, technical diving, where do you start? Let's have a look. All right. So, once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there was a shipwreck. That's a little bit how my technical diving story starts. It started about 16, 17 years ago in Scotland. I was living there. I was just taking my first steps into the professional side of diving, and off the east coast of Scotland, shipwrecks were being discovered. How? Well, companies were making surveys of the bottom of the sea just off the east coast. What they were looking for were good locations for marine wind farms. What do you need for these wind farms? You need a flat bottom. When they did these surveys, they also discovered areas where there wasn't a flat bottom, where there was sort of a hump on that bottom. Those results were obviously thrown out when it came to locations for marine wind farms, but they were being bought by two boat charter companies who started systematically diving these places and found pretty untouched World War II wrecks. Now, a lot of them were in the depth range of 40 to 60 meters. For me, as a recreational diver at the time, that was so close, but so far. So that was just on the edge of the 40-meter range that I could dive to. But I also thought it was so potentially achievable that I could qualify further and go and dive these wrecks. Now, that is what started me on my journey to becoming a technical diver, which has since then led me not only into wrecks, but also into caves and along deep reefs. My point is we all have different motivations for technical diving. It's hard to say that there is a right or wrong motivation for technical diving. You might have been inspired by shipwrecks. You might be looking to dive into caves. You might be looking to explore what lies at greater depths if you're diving somewhere where there's, for example, deep drop-offs. You might also just be looking to expand your existing knowledge or improve the skills that you bring to your recreational dives. All of those are pretty good reasons to look into technical diving and to see what technical diving might have to offer you. So, motivations, lots of different ones. What about the time? When should you start considering technical diving? The right time or the absolute best time doesn't really exist. When I took my first technical diving courses, I had just become a recreational instructor. I had probably a few hundred dives to my name, so I was sort of in this middle ground of experience. So let's take a look at some reasons for and against starting sooner and for and against starting later. If you start a little bit earlier in your diving career, then you will very likely bring fewer bad habits to your technical diving. Your current diving knowledge is very likely to be up to date because you've only just taken courses or training with instructors that are hopefully sharing some of the things that they've most recently learned. But you might be missing a broad range of experience. Throughout my professional diving career, I've also taught in places where people had the opportunity to go what's called 0 to hero, to start diving and then almost immediately move on to instructor. Now, I don't really want to get into a debate on these sorts of diving programs. They work very well for some people and not so good for others. But what that often leads to is that somebody only has experience in one very specific environment, and that might be a bit limiting. But experience is not the same as experience. If you have bad habits and you keep reinforcing them through experience, then that's not necessarily a positive. And that's one of the things that can happen when you take that step into technical diving later. You might have bad habits and they might be very, 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 very cemented in your diving practice. You will bring more diving experience for sure, but that can go both ways. Now, one thing that I've seen recently is somebody came to do a rebreather course, which is another step again, but with a few thousand dives to his name. But a lot of those dives had been recreational, and there were some habits that were really hard to iron out. So then the number of dives that you bring to your technical diving course is not only an advantage, it can go the other way as well. So is there a perfect number? Not really. You can look at diving agency prerequisites for different courses. Now, some of you might already know me, but basically I certify according to the TDI system. And if you look at the basic entry-level technical diving qualifications there, the prerequisite is in many cases 25 dives. Now, for some people, that is enough. For me personally, it wouldn't have been at the time that I started diving, but that doesn't mean that it's the wrong number. So these prerequisites give you an idea. They're not set in stone other than being a minimum. What is the perfect number? Somewhere between several dozen and a few hundred dives, perhaps. At least that is the number that I've had most students come to me and then be successful in their training. But I have trained people who came with 50 dives. They've been trained very well from their very first courses. They took to diving. So their learning curve was potentially a little bit less steep than it was for some others. But that doesn't mean that better or worse divers, they're just a little bit more natural at diving than others. So divers develop differently. There's no right or wrong time to start looking into technical diving. There's also their practicalities. So we don't all have time and the budget when we would like to do these things. So don't be deterred if you think you have too few dives, or if you think that it's been a while since you've taken a course. Just start where you're at. That's exactly what will happen on a tech course. Your instructor will look at where you're at and take things from there. Is there such a thing as technical diving courses for recreational divers? Yes, there is. And why do they make sense? Because not everybody starts tech diving because they're looking for greater depth or to dive in wrecks or caves. Many people do, but some people also start taking technical courses or so-called technical courses because they simply like to polish or improve their existing diving skills. the requirement, the passing requirement for your buoyancy and your stability in the water in a technical course will be higher than it was in many recreational courses. So having to deal with those requirements and working your way towards that level of diving is a perfectly reasonable reason to join an introductory technical course. Perhaps you want to learn more about different propulsion techniques, because they'll also stand you in really good stead as a photographer in shallow water. Perhaps you want to improve your knowledge of different diving configurations, or you would like to expand your knowledge about diving theory. In fact, that was one of the motivations I had when I first signed up for my dive master course. I really wasn't necessarily that interested in teaching diving or accompanying other divers. I wanted to know more about diving, and technical diving just wasn't available where I was, or at least it wasn't on my radar. It wasn't very likely available, but I didn't know about it. So the obvious thing that was available to me was the Dive Master course, complete with thick manuals talking about diving theory. That's really what I wanted. As it turns out, I enjoyed the assisting courses part and thought, you know what, maybe I could do that as well. And here we are now. Different story for a different time. But again, a good reason, if you're not really interested in this teaching side of things, but want to expand your diving knowledge, consider a technical diving course. What are examples for these tech courses for recreational divers? Two that come to mind. GUE's fundamentals course has a recreational version, has a technical version. I've never seen anyone come out of that course being a worse diver than they were before. Or TDI's Intro to Tech is another one of those courses that can just allow you to dip your toes in, maybe figure out if this is for you and if you want to take it further, and just learn more and improve your diving skills. Now, if you've decided that you want to do more, then one of the decisions you may have to make is to choose between Twinset or doubles and side mount configuration. Yes, you can do both. Yes, you could also start by rebreather diving. Again, different presentation. But let's have a look at some of the reasons for or against Twinset, doubles, or side mount diving. Now then, let's start with the Twinset with doubles. For a very long time, for decades, this has been the classic way of starting technical diving or introducing redundancy or greater amounts of gas into your diving. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. It's a relatively compact setup once everything is together. So it almost becomes this backpack that has everything already clipped to it that you put on your back and off you go. Potentially easier to get on and off boats, especially if there are moving, floating platforms. Even if you think about the Red Sea, for example, on a lot of boats, on a lot of dive sites, the boat will not necessarily moor up, but actually drop you somewhere and later go and moor, or just remain floating nearby. And you will have to stand on that platform before you go off the boat. That could be easier with something more compact on your back than with multiple tanks that are moving on your sides. So it's quite standardized as well. That means if you know how your Twinset is set up, you will, in most cases, have a decent idea of how your teammates' equipment is set up, with some variation, but most of the basics are quite standardized across divers. But there's the question of the weight of the whole thing and of your profile underwater. So you're just not quite as streamlined. And I think you can even see that a little bit in those pictures. Granted, the Twinset diver has a stage tank, the side mount diver does not, but it is a different sort of shape underwater. Side mount, on the other hand, comes from cave diving and has really made its way into the mainstream in the last 10, 15 years, perhaps. So it's gone from being a tool to move from cave sump to cave sump, really to something that is some people's favorite, some people's only configuration. It is arguably smaller, lighter, more flexible. Why? Because you carry your cylinders to the water one by one. Also because you can choose if that works with your dive plan, with your gas consumption, you can choose to have smaller cylinders. For traveling, quite often you'll find that a side mount wing and harness will fold smaller than back mount equipment. All of those have exceptions to the rule, but just sort of on a whole. So it's quite travel friendly. For a lot of people, it's easier on their back. So I've seen divers who simply don't like to carry the weight of Twinsets anymore and then start switching to side mount. And it allows exploration, for example, in places where you cannot necessarily get double setups. But boat entries definitely need practice. Are they doable? Absolutely. But you will need to look at the boat, you will need to think ahead a little bit, and you'll have to practice getting on and off boats and getting your gear on and off so that it's fluid and that you're not requiring entire crew members' attention and taking that away from the other people on the boat. Plus, diving with stages needs practice as well. The same could be said for twinset and doubles diving. In side mount, usually if your setup is not right, then you're very quickly in that stage where it becomes uncomfortable and it's something that plays on your mind for the whole dive. So it does take that time, it does take that fine tuning, and depending on who you speak to, it's very much worth it. If you know me, you see that I'm doing a lot of side mount diving, and I love that playing, I love getting it right. But for some others, that's not what you want to do. That's fair enough. So this is the choice you have to make. This is one of the things you need to consider. Another question might be which agency you should train with. Now then, this is one of these questions where I'm going to say it's potentially not very critical to really worry about the agency that you pick for your training. It's more critical that you look at the instructor. Why do you need to find the right instructor? Because you want to find somebody that you trust. You also want to find somebody that will train you to high standards. Technical diving is sort of the sharp end of diving. Recreational diving is really accessible. It's something that a lot of people can do and achieve quite easily. Technical diving, what do I mean by it's the sharp end? When a technical dive goes wrong, the consequences tend to be bigger. So that means that training has to reflect that. Look for an instructor that you think will suit your style of training and find out as much as you can about how they train, how they teach. Sort of ask about that more than just looking at the agency. What other questions can you ask? If you really are looking at agency, then look and check whether the agency offers the courses that you're interested in taking. So, for example, if you want to go into cave diving all the way towards the full cave level, then choose an agency that offers that so that you're used to the style of the course, the style of the training materials, and you're getting into that swing of things. Is the certification internationally recognized? Most of them are now. Most well-known agencies adhere to ISO standards, so your certification will be recognized wherever you go. But if you plan to travel with that certification, check that the course you're doing, the agency you're doing it through, is internationally recognized. Here's another question that might sound not very intuitive initially. How hard is it to become an instructor for that level of training, for that level of diving within that agency? Why should you as a diver know about that or ask about that? In my opinion, it reflects a little bit the agency's attitude towards numbers versus quality. This isn't about making it very hard to become an instructor. This is about forcing people, because sometimes we have to be forced, let's be honest, to take things step by step and to gain experience at each step before they move up to the next level. And this is important for instructors because just like divers, we need to gather experience at a certain level of teaching before we can think about teaching at another level. It all sounds very logical, but some agencies take this more seriously than others, and I think it's a good thing to look at to see what you might expect from your training also. Another thing to ask is, how important is technical diving for this agency? If you're committed and you think that you want to really follow a technical diving path, then makes sense to do your courses through an agency that is as committed as you are, as interested as you are. What are the materials like? Are they current? Are they being updated? Is there development happening? How important is technical diving to the agency? And does that reflect my motivation? And then there's a practical thing. How can I access training? Is there an instructor near me? Can I travel easily to an instructor that I want to train with? Are the courses readily available, or is it hard to schedule? It's one of these things when there's two people meeting, an instructor that has limited availability and the student that has limited free time, it can become tricky. So these practical questions also play a role in your choice. So training locations, instructors, is there something like e-learning available? I'm a big fan of doing e-learning before students arrive, not because I don't want to spend the time on the theory, but because I like my students to arrive with questions so that we can go deeper into certain aspects and so that we can supplement what they've already read or worked through, rather than them having to purely go on presentations. I think the two very much go hand in hand. I think there's a definite place for theory during the courses, but if you have done some learning before you arrive, then you arrive simply better prepared. So where do you start? We've talked a little bit about introductory courses, and we've talked a little bit about the attitudes of different agencies you're choosing. But let me share another few thoughts about where you could start. One of the things you could use to guide your decision is simply look at location. Another thing you could do is look at whether you want to learn about a configuration first, or go straight for a technical diving levels requiring mandatory deco. And obviously then there's the practical thing of time and budget. So let's start with location. The big choice there is whether you train where you are and where you might want to dive, or whether you train on holiday. Why the inverted commas? Because a technical diving course is not a holiday. So as long as you are happy to give away your vacation time, your holiday, for a demanding diving course, then all is good. Why would you train at home? Because you are dedicated to diving there, because that is where you want to spend your time doing your technical diving. Why would you not do that? Because perhaps it's harder to schedule. Perhaps you find it harder to dip in and out of learning over several weekends. Ask yourself, which one is easier to plan and organize for me? Why would you choose a location like, for example, Gozo or Malta, where I am based? Because you can train pretty much year round, because often the water is warmer than it might be in Northern Europe. And that means we can spend a bit more time in the water. And by a bit more time, sometimes 10, 20 minutes can make all the difference, because you can repeat a skill once or twice more when you're not getting super cold. Yes, that also has to do with what you're wearing underwater, but it's a consideration. Second part there, Are you going to learn about the configuration first, or are you going straight for a decompression level course? Now, option one, configuration only, can make for an easier learning curve. So choosing something like an intro to tech to learn how to handle a Twinset or doubles, or choosing a basic Sidemount course to simply understand the configuration, allows you to take something away from that course and then maybe go away to practice before you're then using those skills and apply them to a decompression level course. Fair enough. Then it gives you time to practice, to improve your basic skills, and arrive more confident for the next level of training. Option two, going straight for something like advanced nitrox and deco procedures as a combination, could maximize your course time. That's especially valid if you have limited vacation time, like most of us have. But obviously, standards still need to be met. So it would allow you to start where you're at and develop quite fast, quite a steep learning curve. And it works for some people, whereas option one works for others. Ask yourself, how do you learn best? Are you generally good with steep learning curves? Can you absorb a lot and retain it? If you have learned a lot within a short time? Or are you better when you split things up? Move to one level, then practice, 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 and then move to the next level. Again, there's no right or wrong answers here. The better you know how you learn, the better your experience is going to be. Time and budget. Oh yeah, here we go. This is a hard topic. Now, configuration courses like an intro to tech, like a basic Sidemount course, usually take about 3 days, perhaps a little bit more. Again, this will depend a little bit on the agency and how the courses are set up. Deco courses, somewhere between 5 and 7 days will get you somewhere, again, dependent on instructor, location, agency, and obviously how you're getting on the course. What you need to consider is the whole budget. So what has to be in there? You'll probably have tuition. A lot of technical instructors work with a day rate, and you need to know what that includes. Are you expected to bring your own equipment? Can you purchase some on site? Can you rent some? Will there be additional costs for equipment rental? What about gases? Are they included? Will there be additional costs? How much do you have to budget for travel to the instructor's location or to pay for the instructor's travel to your location? All of those are valid considerations. What about things like e-learning and certification? What other fees are there? The best thing is to get an idea of the total cost as much as you can ahead of time. And that's even possible with things that are charged as used. So for example, deco gases or helium. Most instructors, if you're signing up for a course involving helium, will be able to give you an estimate. Yes, that number can change, but instructors know what is being used on average so that you have a figure that you can budget with. A little bit this way or that, a choice to buy some extra accessories, for example, or to add a day or two, all of that can happen, yes. But if you have an idea from the beginning of what costs there are, which costs are set, and which costs are flexible, then you know what you're working with. And with this, we've arrived at the end of this presentation. Now, I hope you've had some of your questions about technical diving answered. If you would like to know more, if you have more detailed questions, one, you can always drop me a comment right below this video. Two, you have contact details there, so feel free to reach out by email or WhatsApp, or take a look at those two websites to find out more about some of the courses I offer. And don't be a stranger. Hopefully see you here again soon.